Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I am here in my favorite Pride and Prejudice shirt with my peacock earrings and my blanket that has Pride and Prejudice text on it because it is time to announce Jane Austen July. That's right, it's time to announce the 6th annual Jane Austen July Readathon, hosted this year by myself, Katie from Books and Things, and Claudia from Spinster's Library. Every year, I look forward to this readathon, where we spend the entire month of July celebrating the brilliant Jane Austen and focusing on her writing, her legacy, and the Regency time period as a whole. I am not the biggest rereader, but I find Jane Austen's work lends itself to endless rereads, and I look forward to revisiting her novels again and again each and every year. Even though Austen wrote over 200 years ago, there are so many aspects of her work that are timeless and still resonate with readers today. Her characters are so real and relatable, and she captures a wide range of human interaction with her unique brand of biting wit and humor. If you've never read Jane Austen before or are looking to expand your journey with her work, this is a great readathon for you. And if you're a die-hard Janeite, this readathon is a great chance to reread one of your old favorites. As always, we have a bunch of challenges, but all you really need to do to participate in Jane Austen July is to read one of Jane Austen's works. So I do hope that you'll join in and participate this year. Feel free to get involved in the Goodreads group or on Instagram, on YouTube, Twitter, or really whatever social media platform you prefer. But just don't forget to use the hashtag Jane Austen July. And now on to the challenges, group reads, and recommendations. The challenges stay pretty consistent from year to year because, like Jane Austen's novels, we keep wanting to revisit them. Of course, the first challenge is to read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels. And those, in no particular order, are Northanger Abbey, Emma, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, and Mansfield Park. Now this year, our first group read for Jane Austen July will be Northanger Abbey, and we'll be reading it from July 1st through July 10th. It's one of Austen's shorter works, and we'll read 3 chapters a day, which is pretty manageable, hopefully, even for me with a fussy newborn. So yes, Northanger Abbey follows the character of Catherine Morland, who's a sweet, innocent, naive girl obsessed with reading Gothic novels. Her family friends take her away from her quiet country life to Bath, where she makes the acquaintance of various people, including the Tilney family, who invite her to their big Gothic mansion. And there, Catherine suspects that all is not as it seems, that there is this dark Gothic mystery to uncover, just like in her favorite novels. And everything just kind of evolves from that premise. Northanger Abbey is such a fun read for me. I think it is one of Austen's more underrated works and should be read more often. It's simpler in some ways, plot-wise, than her other novels, but I think that simplicity allows us to appreciate the characters and the tone of Austen's writing even more. Plus, I have a soft spot for Catherine Morland. She's the heroine that I most identified with when I was younger. She's just so fresh and impressionable and trusting, and is so heavily influenced by the books she reads. I love how Northanger explores literature and writing and really discusses the novel as a genre when it was still relatively a new art form. I think it's one of Austen's more self-aware works, purposely contrasted with one of her least self-aware heroines. With the possible exception of Emma, I guess. Emma is just completely delusional in her own way. Anyway, I could ramble on more about Northanger, but there will definitely be plenty of time for that this July. The second challenge is to read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels, because she did write some other things as well. This could be her fantastic novella, Lady Susan, or one of her unfinished works, The Watsons or Sanditon, or even a collection of Austen's letters. Or you could join us for the second read-along of Jane Austen July, where we plan to read a large chunk of Juvenilia, which is the work that Jane Austen wrote as a teenager. So this is my collection. It actually has some of the Bronte Juvenilia in it as well. And we'll be reading these from July 11th through the end of Jane Austen July. Jane Austen's Juvenilia is a real riot. They're insanely witty and absurd and unconventional and anything but polite. There is scandal and drunkenness and debt and theft and so much more. It's a bit unrefined and might not be what you expect from Jane Austen, but it's absolutely hysterical. I'm particularly partial to The History of England, which is a parody of English history textbooks that Jane Austen's sister, Cassandra, actually illustrated. And I also love The Beautiful Cassandra, which is a parody of sentimental novels of the time period. I can't wait to reread the bits of Juvenilia that I've read before and also explore some of her works that I've never had the chance to read. This is going to be a really exciting read-along because I feel like there are a lot of people who have read all of Jane Austen's novels but haven't had a chance to explore her Juvenilia. And it's super accessible too. You don't have to buy a book or a collection or anything because so much of Austen's Juvenilia is available online. It's also a great read-along for you if you're super busy or want to read other things in July as well, because it's just a lot of little short pieces, so you don't have to read all of them. You can dip in and out of them as you choose based on the schedule. I've linked a lot of resources for this challenge in the description, where you can find these things online, as well as the schedule of what we're reading and when. So make sure that you take a look at that. The third challenge is to read a nonfiction work about Jane Austen or about her time period. There are a million options for this challenge. You could read a biography, there are plenty of them, or a book about the time period, the Georgian or Regency era. You could read some literary criticism, or just a very niche nonfiction book that isn't really exactly any of these. For this challenge and the next challenge, I have so many books that I'm aware of and that are on my radar, but that I don't feel comfortable officially recommending because I haven't read them myself yet. If you want me to make a video of Jane Austen related books that are on my radar that I have not gotten around to reading yet, I definitely can. But for now, I'm just going to recommend some of my old favorites, which I talk about all the time on this channel. If you're looking for a biography, there are so many great ones, but my two favorites are Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. Lucy Worsley is probably my favorite nonfiction author, and she has written a biography of Jane Austen based on the different places where Jane Austen lived. So it's a really interesting read and one that I highly recommend. And my other favorite biography of Jane Austen is The Real Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things by Paula Byrne. This book is probably better if you know a little bit about Jane Austen, but it looks at a bunch of different objects that Jane would have been familiar with or that she owned, and delves into the historical significance of them and their importance in Jane's life. And another one of my favorite Austen nonfiction books that I talk about quite often is What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullen. This book looks at all of Jane Austen's works at once and discusses very specific topics within Austen's writing. Things like age and sex and the weather. It's a really interesting read, but I do recommend having read all of Jane Austen, or at least her main 6 novels, and probably her unfinished works, Sanditon and the Watsons, before delving into this one. I also realized a type of book that I didn't mention that you could also read for this challenge is a recipe book. I have Tea with Jane Austen here, and I think it would be fun to learn more about the food and drink in the time period. And one of my favorite history books that I've read is Jane Austen's England, Daily Life in the Georgian and Regency Periods by Roy and Leslie Atkins. I believe this goes by a different title in the UK, and I can't remember it right now, but it will definitely be featured in Katie from Books and Things' announcement video, so if you're in the UK, you can just check it out there. But this is a very comprehensive history of Jane Austen's England. The fourth challenge is to read a retelling of a Jane Austen book or a work of historical fiction set in Jane Austen's time. So there are a million books for this challenge as well, and more seem to come out every day, but I will just go through a few of my favorites. I think part of the fun of watching this video must be watching my Jane Austen July shelf getting depleted as I pull things out to show you. So one of the books that would fit this challenge is Miss Austen by Jill Hornby. This is all about Jane's sister Cassandra after Jane has passed away, reminiscing on their life together. Cassandra destroyed many of Jane Austen's letters, and this book looks into why that may have been. It's a really profound exploration of grief and sisterhood, and really reveres Jane Austen's work and her legacy. Jill Hornby also wrote Godmersham Park, which is about the real-life figure of Anne Sharp, who was governess to Fanny Austen, which was Jane Austen's niece. So it's all about Anne Sharp, governesses, and her relationship with the Austen family. It's a really great read. Both of these are, and I've done full reviews of them on my channel, which I'll link down below. One of my absolute favorite retellings of a Jane Austen novel is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice where Mary Bennet is the protagonist, and the beginning of the book follows Pride and Prejudice pretty closely, but after the events of Pride and Prejudice end, Mary really comes into her own and has her own story that is just so fun to follow, and the ending of this book reminded me emotionally of how I felt finishing a Jane Austen book for the first time. Some other recommendations include Longbourn by Jo Baker, which I thought I owned but apparently don't, and that follows Pride and Prejudice but from the servant's perspective. I found it really entertaining and just a great read all around. Servants are actually quite present in Pride and Prejudice and yet manage to fade into the background as well. If you're looking for some lighthearted Regency rom-coms, there are a few books I can recommend. One of them is this one, Confessions of a Jane Austen Addict, which is about a modern-day woman who suddenly wakes up in Regency England in someone else's body, and it's about her struggles trying to live as this woman and also get back to her modern day life. It's a lot of fun, but it's a little frustrating actually how someone who is such a self-proclaimed Jane Austen addict is rather inept at navigating Regency society and seems to not know a lot about Jane Austen's time period. And then there are also Lex Croucher's books. There is Reputation, which was a whole lot of fun, and Infamous, which I haven't read yet, and I think Lex Croucher is coming out with a new book called Trouble, which I know next to nothing about. The fifth challenge is to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. So someone who published works between roughly 1775 and 1817. The idea here is to just read something that Austen might have read or have been familiar with, or even perhaps something that inspired her writing, just to better understand the literary atmosphere she was born into and that she was a part of. So you could read some early novels or some poetry or plays. There are some of Jane Austen's favorite novelists like Fanny Burney or Maria Edgeworth. There's Susan Edmondstone Ferrier and Charlotte Lennox. Or you could read Sir Walter Scott. Or you could read some poetry. The Romantic poets all fit into this time frame. Coleridge, Blake, Byron, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats. Or you could read one of Austen's favorite poets, like Cooper. Or you could read a play. One year, maybe it was last year or the year before, I read the play that they actually put on in Mansfield Park called Lover's Vows by Elizabeth Inchbald, which really provided an interesting context and added a layer of meaning to Mansfield Park. The sixth challenge is to watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. There are so many great ones for this, but my favorites are, of course, Pride and Prejudice, the 1995 BBC miniseries with Colin Firth. I also do like the 2005 Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley. There's the 1995 version of Persuasion, which I think remains my favorite, but also the 2007 version is rather good as well. There's the 2009 Emma BBC miniseries, which I believe is my favorite. But there are also some other great Emmas out there, like the newer, was it 2020 version? The really aesthetic one, you know which one I'm talking about. I'm sure I will have a picture. There's the 2007 Northanger Abbey, which I think is phenomenal. I just love J.J. Field as Henry Tilney. And I enjoy Sense and Sensibility, the 2008 BBC miniseries. And I absolutely love the movie Love and Friendship, which is not about the Jane Austen Juvenilia piece, Love and Friendship, which we will be reading this Jane Austen July. Instead, it's actually a fantastic adaptation of Lady Susan. And then there's Sanditon, which it's a little confusing whether we should call it a direct screen adaptation or not, because it's an unfinished work that it's adapting, and in the first season, it really successfully adapts the unfinished work, but then even in the first episode, I think it goes off from there and turns into its own story. I've watched the first season and enjoyed it. I think I had a lot of mixed thoughts and feelings about it, actually. And then the second and third seasons I have not watched yet, but one of these days maybe I will rewatch the first season because I watched it a long time ago, and watch the second and third and chat with you guys about it. Probably not this year, but maybe next. We'll see. And the last challenge is to watch a modern screen adaptation or retelling of a Jane Austen book. For this one, I've got a lot of favorites, but one worth mentioning that was new to me last year was Fire Island, which is a queer adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, and I kind of loved it. I feel like it does what Clueless did for Emma, but to Pride and Prejudice. Taking something really modern, but keeping the spirit of Jane Austen's work within it. Speaking of which, of course, the next thing I'll mention is my absolute favorite, Clueless. Alicia Silverstone's Cher Horowitz really captures the essence of the Jane Austen character of Emma. She's meddlesome and privileged and also so endearing. And there are so many smart choices that this movie makes. There's also Bridget Jones's Diary, which I've mentioned before on my channel in book form. I've read the book. It's not as good as the movie. I recommend just watching the movie, I think. And also it has many sequels. And if you're in the mood for a good rom-com, Bridget Jones's Diary is a great place to go. And then there's also Bride and Prejudice, which is a 2004 Bollywood version of Pride and Prejudice. It's a lot of fun, lots of dancing and singing. And, of course, the baseline of Pride and Prejudice is there as well. There's also some really great modernized adaptations, which are web series on YouTube, like the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, Emma Approved, Northbound, which is an adaptation of Northanger Abbey, and the Kate Morland Chronicles, which is, again, an adaptation of Northanger Abbey. There's From Mansfield with Love, which is possibly the best adaptation of Mansfield Park I've ever seen, and Rational Creatures, which is a Persuasion adaptation that relatively recently, maybe a few months ago, came out with its second season, which I'm very excited to watch. So that is all I have for you guys. I really hope that you will participate in Jane Austen July. In the comments down below, I would love to hear some of your recommendations for me, perhaps. I feel like there are a lot of other things that I could have recommended here and probably have forgotten, and you'll recommend them in the comments and I'll be like, oh yes, why didn't I put that in my video? But that's okay. I can't wait to see what you guys are excited to read for Jane Austen July. And if you have any special video requests that you would like to see from me, please just mention them in the comment section down below. I have some ideas brewing. I'm really excited this year, I think, to explore themes of youth and naivete and just kind of coming into one's own in Jane Austen and her works. You know, we're reading Juvenilia, we're reading Northanger Abbey with a rather immature heroine, and I just had a baby, so I'm really thinking about childhood and youth and growth and development right now in my life, and Jane Austen July just kind of really works well with that, I think, this year. So I'm excited to play up those themes in some of my videos. Anyway, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and excitement for Jane Austen July. I can't wait. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!